Hello everyone, Hyper here. If you've been following me on Twitter or you tuned into any of my streams, you probably know that my guild is going Horde at the end of the week. And I just wanted to make a quick video about why we see so many top guilds and top players, even in the PvP scene, going Horde, especially in Legion compared to previous expansions. So out of the top 50 guilds, we have 12 that are Alliance and 38 that are Horde. Now this is overall on a global scale, so it includes all the regions. In the US and then in other regions, the breakdown might be slightly different, but this is just to give you an overall sense of how many Horde guilds there are in the top rating scene compared to Alliance guilds. First of all, we saw a bunch of guilds going Horde whenever they got to kill Jaden because of the Goblin Passive or the racial. And this was because on Kill Jaden, the knockback is way more difficult to deal with than on heroic and normal difficulties, just because of how far it knocks you back. And being a goblin allowed classes such as Shadow Priests and Death Knights and other immobile classes who don't have a momentum cancel to actually be able to participate in the fight and help with progress. So this caused a few guilds to swap over to Horde. We saw guilds such as Easy in NA who swapped over, and then a few other guilds followed their lead. And this kind of caused a chain reaction that caused more guilds to go Horde, even after they were done with Kill Jaden, which is what my guild is doing. So if you're still an Alliance guild in the top rating scene, you will probably notice that recruiting is much more difficult since most of the top guilds did go Horde. And usually you don't recruit up from top guilds, but you recruit from guilds below you. And it is just much easier to find players on the Horde side if you're looking to recruit for top end rating. Now, this doesn't really apply to mid-level mythic rating or lower end mythic rating as much as it does to the top tier, but quite a few guilds and players still decided to go Horde. And this is mostly because of the racials, to be honest. Mythic Dungeons never really had a prevalent role in top end rating or mythic rating in general. Right, Mythic Dungeons in previous expansions or before that it was just Heroic Dungeons. You would do them at the beginning of the expansion whenever there was no raid out yet, or if they offered a weekly incentive, such as, I don't know, Valor points or something along those lines. You would do a few here and there, but you never really got any significant upgrades from them. And in Legion, they implemented the Mythic Plus system, which gives pretty good baseline gear, which is capped at 915 right now, at a plus 10, which is extremely easy to do if you've done any kind of PvE. Even if you're a normal raider, you can do a plus 10. And at plus 10, with the gear being capped at 915 baseline, and then it can time forge all the way up to 955, we see upgrades from Mythic Pluses, even on my character, which is over 940 at this point. I sometimes get tiny upgrades or side grades out of Mythic Plus. And Mythic Plus is just super relevant, even at the high-end rating scene, and it looks like it will continue to stay relevant throughout the expansion. And for Mythic Plus, which is the best class right now, if you think about it? Well, it's Blood Elf, because of the Arcane Torrent. It's a blanket silence, you can cover multiple ads with it, and it's just extremely powerful whenever you're running higher keys, because you can have one person who has their own class interrupt, such as for Death Knights you have Mind Freeze, and then on top of that you have an Arcane Torrent, which doesn't really DR because it's an interrupt technically. So you can cover multiple ads. So you can have potentially 2 interrupts per person. One of them is an AoE, so that's extremely powerful. If you look over on Alliance side, you don't really have anything like it. Gnomes, right, they can get out of the snares, and then you have the human racial get out of stuns, but you don't have anything that is really as powerful as the Arcane Torrent for Mythic Plus. Now, Arcane Torrent is also extremely good for PvP, especially if you're a healer, you get the mana back, and it is also Blanket Silence, as I mentioned before. For example, you have 2 melee on you, and you cannot get kicked, because if you do, you will die. So you just press Arcane Torrent, this locks out both melee classes out of their kicks, so you can get at least one cast off. So we see this being extremely useful in PvP, And then on the other end, if you're a melee class or even a caster DPS, you can use that as an additional interrupt to your own interrupt. Now, other than Blood Elves, obviously, we have Goblins, which give us Rocket Jump. Really good passive if you're an immobile class, like a Death Knight and a Shadow Priest, as I said before. On certain fights, like Kill Jaden, where a momentum cancel used to be basically mandatory. Now, with higher gear level, it's not really all that important. I can get away even with being a human Death Knight and not have to deal with any of those and never have to even take a lock gate. Just because of how high raid DPS is at the moment. But in the early days and early weeks of progression, up to patch 7.3 pretty much, you needed to either deal with the lock gate, and then before that, you needed to have an additional momentum cancel, so Death Knights would run Draft of Souls. That's the trinket we saw very early on in progress, but then as the DPS increased, they stop being that necessary, so now you can get away without it. But once guilds went Horde, there's no reason to go back Alliance. Recruiting, as I said before, recruiting is easier, you have better racials, so once you made the switch, you're not going to go back just because of one boss. So then we have the Orc racial, which is the Blood Fury, that's just the extra AP, and you have Hardiness, which for PvP is extremely useful. If you're like a warrior, for example, you can run Relentless PvP talent along with it, so you have a 40% reduction on stuns and then 20% overall reduction on any CC. For Torrents, you have War Stomp, which is kind of like a worse version of Arcane Torrent in my opinion, because you have to cast it and you don't get any mana back. It is a stun, but in most Mythic Pluses, you have multiple classes who can stun, so it is DR'd. But if you use it smart, it can also be used as an AoE interrupt. But then they also have Endurance, which for tanks is really useful for that extra stamina. And for Trolls, you have Berserking, which is just a mini Bloodlust, pretty nice passive. So what does this mean for the future of top-end raiding? Well, as more and more guilds shift towards the Horde side, we will see potentially another complete rebalance of the class racials, which is ultimately what's causing this shift from the Alliance to the Horde. And we saw numbers from the end of Mod to the beginning of Legion, and then even throughout Legion, decrease on Alliance side, increase on Horde side, and Blizzard will have to do something about this, because otherwise you will just see more and more guilds go Horde and follow over for the better racials, easier recruitment, and all those things. I'd really love to hear what ideas you guys have about balancing these class racials, because Blizzard have tried to mess around with them in the past, especially in the PvP, but now that they're so irrelevant in the PvE scene as well, I feel like there needs to be another set of changes made to make Alliance racials either better or nerf the Horde ones, to kind of stop this shift of player base from Alliance towards the Horde side. That's all I have for today. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And also, if you'd like to follow what I'm up to, just check out my Twitter at Legend Hyperion, or if you want to interact with me live, you can check out my stream at twitch.tv/Hyperion29. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.